Okay, hello and welcome back. This is part 2 of chapter 6. I'm sorry, you guys. There's a lot going on in my house between 2 cats and a dog and 2 kids and a spouse. There's just a whole lot of crazy going on right now. In fact, there's a cat at my foot, so she may decide to join us in a few moments. So we're going to jump back in here with identity issue of development. So as you know, Erickson came up with the concept of identity versus identity confusion. This is when teenagers are really working on learning who they are and who they're going to become, essentially. So he said there's a point where teenagers are kind of confused about who they are. I'm sure many of you remember, I don't know what I want to major in when I get to college. I'm not really sure what I want to be when I grow up. I'm not sure where I fit in with my friend group as it stands right now. And so he called this time psychosocial moratorium. Remember that feeling you had when you were kind of about 12, maybe 13 years old, and you'd go to a family party and you weren't really sure that you fit in anymore with the younger cousins or like the younger kids, but you didn't really quite fit in with the adults yet. Think of that feeling, and that's what he was talking about here. He said teenagers are generally free to try out lots of different identities and determine what's right for them. So remember back when I talked about the cafeteria example about how you sort of move between sitting with different groups of people to try to figure out, do I fit in here with the athletes? Do I fit in over here with the theater folks? Do I fit in over here with the people who don't care about school anymore? Think back in high school, especially freshman, sophomore year, when you were just trying to figure out who was going to be your friend group, who are you going to hang with for the high school experience. So if you have resolved that conflict, you kind of emerge senior year, go off to college, and you really feel like, I totally know who I am. And I'm confident in knowing that these are my characteristics, these are the traits I believe in, these are my values and my morals, and you feel a sense of accomplishment. And that's where Erickson said you formed your identity. It doesn't mean that there's going to be parts of you over time that are going to continue developing. It just means that for right now, as a teenager, you've started the process of forming your identity. When teenagers come out the other end and say, I still don't know who I am, this is where you see people who come to college and sort of flutter around and kind of go with different crowds, and they're still trying to find their way. It doesn't mean it's not possible to find their identity. It just means they haven't quite gotten there yet. We tend to see people who do this, they have a lot more withdrawal, isolation, and they tend to just go along with whatever their friends are doing. And so that's where we sort of start to be concerned about, especially with the mismatch between the frontal lobe and the limbic system. If they're not making good choices in the first place and they're just going along with the crowd, that can be a problem. Okay, so along came this guy named James Marcia. And James Marcia said, all right, there's these different status of identity based on crisis or commitment. So the crisis is this period of time when you kind of keep exploring different alternatives. He was basically saying the same thing as Erickson, but he was a student of Erickson. And so James Marcia said, yeah, I'd like to take this identity confusion piece and go a little bit deeper with it. And so he proposed that there's these other stages within the moratorium piece. And so he said, a crisis is when you kind of explore. So I know that housing selection right now is going on. So you're trying to figure out, where are you going to live next year? Are you going to live in the tower? Are you going to live off campus? Are you going to stay living at home with your parents who are probably driving you crazy by now in quarantine? Or are you going to do something totally different? So that's a crisis, right? You're trying to figure out, where do I fit? Where do I belong? Where am I going to live? Commitment is putting down a security deposit on a new apartment, putting down your housing money, making a commitment with friends. Yes, we're going to live together next year, right? So think of it kind of in that way. So crisis is not always a terrible, horrible pandemic kind of crisis. It's more of a, you're considering your options kind of thing. So these other stages here underneath it. So diffusion is for people, again, we're going to talk about majors for a minute. People who have not experienced any kind of decision making, and they sort of just go with the flow. They pick a college because they're like, oh, the lake's pretty. People here seem nice. I got a good financial aid package. I'll go to Carthage. That's diffusion. They really have made no commitment other than, I'll pick this college. They haven't made a commitment to their major. They haven't really made a commitment to what they're going to be after college. They just sort of like this, go with the flow kind of thing. Foreclosure is people who have made a commitment, not really experience that crisis. So, for example, my nephew decided to study automotive engineering when he was in college because his dad told him, there's good money in that field. You can make $100,000 if you get a degree in automotive engineering. So he went through and did it. He was terrible at it. He was very smart. He really couldn't figure his way out from the other side of the engine. Once the hood popped open, he was completely useless. He had foreclosed because he had made a commitment to the field based on something his dad told him to do, not because he had a choice in the matter or that he thought he had a choice. He just went along with it. Now, moratorium is the point when you're in the middle of a crisis, your commitments are completely absent. This is when you think, I know I need to get a new room next year. I need a new roommate. I need a new place to live. I need a new apartment. I need a new dorm room, whatever it might be. You have made no commitments. This could also be related to things like you decide to go out on the weekends, someday again when we actually can leave our homes. Do I want to go to this party, or do I want to stay in and study, or do I want to go do this? Should I skip class tomorrow? Those sorts of things, right? So you're sort of in these little mini decision-making things, but they're more related to your identity more than just typical, should I do the homework for this class or should I do the homework for this class? This is more about your identity. If I go hang out at this party, I could be accepted into that friend group. If I instead decide to stay in and do homework, people might think differently about me because I'm a nerd. So this is sort of about your identity and about developing who you are more so than about general kinds of questions you have to have each day. Achievement is for those people who have undergone that crisis and made that commitment. So you made a choice between choosing nursing versus med school. Made that choice, so you've achieved that choice, right? It's become part of your identity. Made a choice between power and living off campus. That's going to become part of your identity for next year. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, we keep having these cycles over and over again. Let's see which slide it's that. So you see here how it's moratorium achievement. There's this thing called the MAMA cycle, M-A-M-A, get it? We go through this all the time. I promise you, you are going to keep having identity crises as you go forward in life. Excuse me, you'll continue to do moratorium achievement throughout life. And so you keep going back and forth. But just like Erickson said, his 8 stages of development can always be repeated. James Marcia, student of Erickson, said, identity, moratorium, and achievement can also be repeated over and over again. This is just a graph looking at Marcia's, way that he talked about moratorium and all the different stages, but it's not. Okay. These are different types of identity that people develop as they're going through adolescence. There's so many other things, right? There's lots of other ways that you can develop your identity. Okay, parents with autonomy and attachment issues with their teenagers. Remember when you were in high school and you really wanted to break out and do your own thing, and your parents were like, no, hold on a second. Might have even said something along the lines of, if you never let me make my own mistakes, how am I ever going to learn from them? Teenagers want to have their own autonomous life. They want to be their own person. They want to make their own mistakes. They want to do their own thing. Parents have a hard time with this because parents have probably made these mistakes and parents have probably made these choices and they know that they're not the best choices made. So parents sometimes want to say no or put their foot down and say, I don't think this is a good idea. Whereas teenagers constantly want to push against that, right? They're always asking for more. They want, you give an inch, they want a mile kind of thing. So this isn't a terrible thing because this tension that you experience with your parents is actually very, very good for development. Kids are supposed to feel securely attached. When we talk about attachment, you're supposed to feel very securely attached. Kids who are attached to their parents actually have their relationships with their peers, their romantic relationships later on in life, which is good. Now, this freedom and control business with attachment and autonomy, teenagers still need to stay connected to their families. And parents can play an active role in kind of watching and guiding teenagers. Development will have more positive peer relationships and lower drug use. Many of you wrote in your self-assessment, the ones that have been turned in already, that your parents had some pretty strict rules, like no sleepovers until your parents met the parents of the friend you wanted to sleep over at their house, or no sleepovers, period. This is parents' way of trying to stay connected to their kids and trying to stay involved. If it goes too far, the teenager may rebel and want to do other things. But if the teenager understands, well, my parents are just like this and I don't really get it, but this is just my family norm, I'm still really connected to my family, they're important to me, teenagers are less likely to rebel. Now, this parent-adolescent conflict, so this, all those arguments with your parents as you were growing up, this is actually a good thing. Teenagers tend to argue with their parents over really dumb stuff. When you look back at it, it's really dumb stuff. In the moment, it feels like the most important conversation you're ever having. It's typically things like, if you don't keep your room clean, I'm taking away your privileges. If you're not in by curfew, then you can forget using the car the rest of the week. It's things like that. These are not high stakes kinds of things. This is not, really major life decisions. These are really pretty everyday things. I asked you to drive your brother to his practice. You didn't, so now I'm taking away your phone. So that's what we're talking about here. This can actually serve a really positive developmental function, because home is typically where people feel safest and they feel most vulnerable. And so teenagers can actually talk back to their parents in a pretty safe, supportive way, because teenagers know at the end of the day, if they're in a healthy family, they know at the end of the day that their family will still love them and support them. So that's why it's a good thing for teenagers to have these arguments at home with their parents, because it's their way of learning how to kind of buck authority, but also learning how to deal with the consequences when that comes back into play. So it's like sibling fights. It's really good to have sibling fights because you're learning about compromise. So siblings teach you about compromise. Parents teach you about what it means to have authority in your life and how to respectfully disagree with authority figures while still developing your own identity. So each of these people in our lives serve a big purpose. At the time, especially I would imagine in quarantine when you're just at each other's throats at the moment, it doesn't feel that way. Trust me, things developmentally are going along swimmingly, so just keep it up. Okay. About 1 in 5 families have prolonged conflict, but it's not that common. Okay, so let's talk about friends in adolescence. So time with friends will likely increase with teenagers, and time with family will likely decrease. So homophilia is friends who are in a mixed, I'm trying to move my little face here, typically in a well-adjusted peer group. They tend to be pretty similar in all their attitudes and values. Over here is a picture from I think this was homecoming because the trees look pretty full and green. It's probably not prom. I think this was homecoming. You'll notice in the picture, they pretty much all look the same. People tend to have friends who look a lot like them and who act a lot like them when they've developed their identity. All very normal developmentally. Positives of having friends that are very similar, they tend to be pretty happy. There's a good social support network, etc. Negatives could be peer pressure, could be some risky decisions in that peer pressure, that kind of thing. Now, a clique is a really small group who has regular interactions. You have your core friend group, right? So that's what we're talking about with clique. It's not like a negative term that we typically talk about with like mean girls. It's more of a small group. You have your 5 or 6 friends, then on a regular basis you check in with them, you talk to them, maybe you go to the cafe and have breakfast every day with them, whatever. Crowd, on the other hand, is more of a larger group. Affiliation is only by reputation alone. So, for example, I have a couple pictures here. Down here on the left, this was Annie's 8th grade trip to Springfield, Illinois. And about this group here, 4 of them or so, are a pretty small clique, and they regularly interacted with these other girls too. Over here, in this group, many of those girls are in the same picture. This was homecoming this year. Homecoming? Yeah, I think it's homecoming. So you see that most of them look the same. So there's some homophilia here. I say that word. Um, but there's also a larger group. So there are some girls in this picture that I've never met before. Um, so that's because they were friends of a friend. So that's more of a crowd because they're friends of friends rather than a smaller group clique. These girls all went kindergarten through 8th grade together. And these girls over here, some of them met in high school because they were friends of friends in high school. So that's the difference there. Okay, so back in the corner. Romantic relationships. So to date serves the purpose of having fun, having a companion, social status, sexual experimentation, intimacy, and you kind of figure out what's your type. What are you attracted to? What do you like about people? It's like that. Process for dating in adolescence is typically it starts off with some sort of mixed group interaction. I remember when Annie was end of 7th grade, one of her friends decided to have a birthday party, going to the movies and watching the movie Batman. I think it was Batman. It was a big group of both boys and girls together, and I think maybe 12 or 13 of them, and kind of equally balanced mixed group. The girls sat in one row and the boys sat in another row and the parents sat in the back of the theater to kind of keep an eye on things. That's a mixed group interaction, right? Versus a group date, it's like 2 or 3 couples, so to say. They're kind of all going out together. They're not really intimate in this kind of group date setting, but it's definitely an outing with people who are interested in each other. And then there's exclusive dates, which is the one-on-one experience. But that's typically the order in which they go: mixed group, group dates, and then exclusive dates. All right, that is the end of chapter 6.